still actually suspended from Facebook, Aseem, or are you back on there now?
No, good evening, Mark. Well, initially I was suspended for 24 hours for that particular post, essentially just sharing what the General Surgeon of Florida had said around people between the age of 39 and 18 really not to have the vaccine because of a very clear signal of increase in cardiac arrest in that group. And then today I found out I was suspended for another 3 days because of a post that I put up 2 weeks ago, which was a reference to my peer-reviewed research into correcting the pandemic of misinformation on the COVID-19 vaccine. So, yes, that's where we are at the moment. And to be honest, Mark, I think this really represents, what happened to me just represents a symptom or a microcosm of the system failure that we are currently going through and experiencing, a system that encourages good people to do bad things, a system that puts the private interests of big corporations ahead of patients and public health, a system where the legal entity that is the corporation has too much unchecked power over the media, over social media. And what does that ultimately mean? Well, it means that we aren't just having suppression of free speech, we're having deliberate suppression of the truth. And therefore, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm not just the only one. You know, Facebook actually even called one of the most pivotal, most important stories of the pandemic, which was the BMJ's investigation into fraud alleged by a Pfizer whistleblower. They call that misinformation. In fact, the BMJ editors wrote an editorial where they described Facebook fact-checkers as being incompetent. So what does this mean in terms of Facebook? And we could go into the root causes of it as well. As far as I'm concerned, Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg are enemies of democracy. And whenever they are mentioned in any context whatsoever, everybody should know Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, as far as I'm concerned, in fact, they should know they are enemies of democracy. He is an enemy of democracy.
Well, your point, which I think is true, is that people tend to think that these fact-checkers are like the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council. They're just a bunch of impartial judges. But in fact, they only fact-check in one direction. And the direction they fact-check in is in the direction of this 2020 vaccine fairy tale, which can no longer be sustained.
Yeah, Marcus, I'm glad you've raised that. So one of the other interesting things I found out, which I wrote about in my paper in the Journal of Insulin Resistance, is Facebook partnered with Merck, drug company Merck, to handle vaccine misinformation on their platform. Now, people need to know about Merck. So Merck is a drug company that is known to have committed fraud, paid almost $1 billion in 2011 for the marketing and the data that they suppressed around its anti-inflammatory drug Vioxx. Now, this was a drug that was promoted as being good for essentially for arthritis or chronic pain like ibuprofen, but ultimately it was found that it had increased cardiovascular risk, and it's estimated that drug killed 60,000 Americans. Now, it wasn't just a mistake. I think what's crucial for people to understand, when the investigation was done, internal emails revealed that scientists at Merck knew when the drug was being rolled out that it was going to cause this problem, but they didn't care. They didn't need to care, Mark, because the legal entity that is the corporation is there to make profit. And I'm not just saying this, you know, we talk about an entity that is anti-human, that is immoral, and according to an expert in his field, Dr. Robert Hare, forensic psychologist, he describes corporations like this as being psychopathic. What does that mean? Deliberately deceiving for profit. So people need to understand what is at the root of this misinformation.
I should say that we put your points about Merck to Merck, and we have not heard back from them. This, by the way, is the regime that Ofcom and others support. It's very difficult to actually, when someone makes points such as you have made, to say, oh, fine, let's have the chairman of Merck on and hear what he has to say about it, because those guys don't want to be out there discussing things in the open. They're just like Michael Grade at Ofcom. They turn down any invitation to discuss this stuff out in the open. Now, how long can this be sustained? You saw the exchange in the European Parliament yesterday. I mean, basically, it's a house of cards, and the cards are falling day by day.
Absolutely, Mark. I don't think it can be sustained for much longer. I think the bubble is about to burst, and I think, you know, the information is spreading. I think GBNews has been at the forefront, certainly in this country, to allow this open debate to happen. But you can see in the real world, I see from patients, colleagues contacting me now, people are aware there's a big problem, certainly with the mRNA vaccines. We know that the efficacy, certainly for Omicron, is very, very poor in terms of preventing COVID death. And we know that as you've alluded to on this show many times, vaccine injuries are real, they are serious, they are not rare. And from my own analysis, by the way, we're talking about the highest quality level of data. This is Pfizer and Moderna's own trials suggesting that the original, in the RCT, that one was more likely to suffer a serious adverse event from taking the vaccine and one was to be hospitalized with COVID. And by the way, let me remind you, that was during the original Wuhan strain. So the situation is likely far worse. And as far as I'm concerned, it's a no-brainer, it's unequivocal. There's no legs to stand on from any public health authority to say that we should continue with this vaccine rollout without informed consent. It needs to be suspended and there needs to be a full public inquiry.